All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's just a couple of minutes after 1:30 here, which is the start of our Reopening Oregon's Outdoors webinar. I'd like to welcome everyone. I'm Kristen Dahl, Vice President of Destination Development at Travel Oregon, and I want to say thank you for taking the time to join us for this webinar. We know that it can be challenging for people to take time away right now from their schedules personally and professionally. Each hour counts, and we really appreciate that you're choosing to spend the next 45 minutes with us to learn about how public lands are responding to the reopening of Oregon. During this webinar, we'll have the opportunity to hear from 3 different entities who will share detailed information about what's permitted in the Phase 1 reopening and the implications to the tourism industry. Information will also be shared about potential pathways that would permit non-local recreationists. This webinar will help translate what Oregon's phased approach to loosening stay-at-home restrictions means for reopening the outdoors to the public. The objectives of today's webinar include clarifying the current reality of Governor Brown's reopening phases as they relate to travel and the outdoors, sharing the current situation of public lands access and reopening in Oregon, sharing information on what it will take to open lands and services within lands, including public camping in the future, and helping partners understand current best thinking around future timelines for further reopening. From recent studies, we know a few things about the outdoor recreation economy in Oregon. We know that there's been over $16.4 billion in consumer spending and over 172,000 direct jobs generated by this sector. We also know that Oregonians have a love affair with recreation, as demonstrated by a 69% participation rate in outdoor recreation activities each year. Lastly, we know that over 23% of marketable overnight trips in Oregon included an experience in our great outdoors. Oregon's bountiful natural resources are cornerstone to our legacy, our identity, and our economy. Travel Oregon actively supports, convenes, and invests in advancing the visitor experiences in the outdoors. We also play a vital role in connecting people with information on where and how they can enjoy the outdoors in Oregon. Several of the ways that we support outdoor recreation experiences through programs like the Oregon Outdoor Recreation Network that we launched in 2016 to support cross-sector collaboration and investment in collective action. The Oregon Outdoor Recreation Summit that we've co-hosted over the past 3 years. Also providing business support for tour operators, guides, and outfitters, developing visitor experiences in 3 primary areas through community-based work that's led to investments in signature trail systems, scenic bikeways, active transportation infrastructure, and then continuing to make investments through our competitive grants programs and regional cooperative tourism programs that just adds fuel to all of that community-based planning work. Lastly, we have nationally acclaimed marketing in this space, everything from the 7 Bikes for 7 Wonders, for those of you who've been in the game long enough to remember that, to Oregon's Slightly Exaggerated campaign. So before we dive in today into discussions and information from our partner agencies, we'd like to share a few tips about getting the most from today's webinar. So the first one is around submitting questions. Please feel free to submit any questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. We did receive quite a number of questions in advance of this session, so we're going to kind of summarize some of those themes and respond to some of those questions, as well as reading the ones that come in today. We'll do our best to get to what we can. We'll also be sharing a recording of this webinar along with additional resources, including the most up-to-date information from our agency partners tomorrow afternoon. Along with this, we'll be sending out a short follow-up survey to gather your feedback on how this webinar met the objectives we just went over, and to gather your input on what additional topics you'd like us to see covered. This webinar is really the first in a mini-series of webinars focused on the reopening of public lands and economic recovery, and it's part of our larger virtual training engagement, virtual training engagement and assistance program, of which you'll hear a little bit more about at the end. So, I'd like to introduce the panelists that you'll be hearing from today. We have Kaylin O'Brien-Feeney, who's the director of the Office of Outdoor Recreation. Kaylin was hired as the first director of Oregon's Office of Outdoor Recreation in 2018, and in this role, he works to elevate the personal, community, and economic benefits of outdoor recreation for all Oregonians. We also have Michelle Mitchell, who's the Associate Director for Recreation for the U.S. Forest Service. Michelle currently serves as the Assistant Director of Recreation, Wilderness, Wild and Scenic Rivers, Heritage, and trails in the Pacific Northwest region of the U.S. Forest Service. She is particularly interested in engaging people and communities in the management of their public lands through partnership. Lastly, we have Erin Curtis, who's the Section Chief for Social Sciences, Bureau of Land Management for Oregon and Washington state offices. Erin's team in Portland is responsible for coordinating a number of BLM programs being implemented out on the ground by 9 district offices across 16 million acres of public land in Oregon and Washington, including the BLM's outdoor recreation, wilderness, wild and scenic rivers, archaeology, volunteer, and youth programs. We're thoroughly delighted to have the 3 of them here today and sharing this really important information. So I'd like to transition over to Kaylin from the Office of Outdoor Recreation, who's going to share more details with us on the approach to reopening, status of counties for their reopening for phase 1, and what that means for communities across the state. So thank you very much.
The way that I'd like to structure the next 15 minutes or so, reviewing where we've been, where we are now, where we're going, and how's it going, or how it is going. So we'll roll back a little bit to early March, have some very current information to share, talk about expected changes in the near term, and then just a little bit of sort of feedback from the field and summary information about how this reopening for outdoor recreation has been going so far. So for now, I'll leave it on the current slide, and this may be review information for a lot of folks, but I just wanted to take a moment to explain it. So starting in mid-March, we saw many outdoor recreation areas across local, state, and federal public lands begin to close, sometimes quite rapidly. That included campgrounds, state parks, certain developed recreation areas like ski areas, and amenities that are often associated with local parks like skate parks, tennis courts, basketball courts, and aquatic facilities. It's also important to remember that over the last 2 months or so, many outdoor recreation opportunities and parks remained open. Generally, this included local parks and trails and dispersed recreation opportunities on state forests and on our federal public lands. So these decisions were made together amongst agencies in support of Governor Brown's Stay Home, Save Lives executive order. And additionally, sometimes at the request of individual communities. For example, if folks remember that first week that many people are on spring break, and we saw very high levels of visitation at the coast coinciding with sunny weather. So since then, local, state, federal land management agencies, private recreation providers, and many other stakeholders have been working to share resources, communicate, and to share information just about initially closures and then developing this reopening strategy. Attention's turned to a reopening strategy several weeks or maybe a month ago, and that included some additional outreach led by the governor's office. I would expect some folks on this webinar perhaps participated in as well. So if you could advance to the next slide, I'd like to go. So where are we now? So this information is still accurate. It came out last Friday, but the headline there is a great summary, I think. Limited recreation opportunities and a call for folks to enjoy the outdoors locally. So if you could advance to the next slide, I'm going to go back not even quite 2 weeks for a little bit more timeline. 2 weeks ago, today, Tuesday, May 5th, Governor Brown announced the limited reopening of certain recreation sites. That happened in advance of the overall framework for reopening Oregon and the phase 1, 2, 3 approach that folks are likely quite familiar with at this point. Later that week on May 8th, we saw finalized outdoor recreation guidance that applies to outdoor recreation organizations and agencies released by the Oregon Health Authority. That went into effect immediately and statewide. Late last week, we saw a new executive order, Safe and Strong Oregon, which formalized that phase 1, 2, 3 approach to restarting aspects of social and economic life on a county by county basis. And as folks on this webinar likely know, the vast majority of Oregon's counties entered into phase 1 last Friday and saw many types of temporarily shuttered businesses begin to reopen. Additional guidance on outdoor recreation and travel was also included in that second executive order that I just mentioned. Perhaps most notably, it removed the restrictions on operations for campgrounds and ski areas, some of which have already started to reopen, as you can see reflected here. Well, where are we now? Things are literally changing by the day. So by the time this webinar posts or is viewed as a recording, the status is going to be slightly different. So our ability to manage change and understand that this is a dynamic situation is probably the overriding theme. We've also seen a couple of additional closures as executive order and Oregon Health Authority guidance started allowing and encouraging reopening. In particular there, I wanted to mention a dispersed camping closure on our Oregon state forests managed by the Department of Forestry, which was necessary due to unsanitary conditions. So if you go back just a slide, I want to run through the open and closed things just a second. I know I skipped ahead. Thanks. So I already kind of summarized most of this, but wanted to just call out in particular a couple of things to point out. So you'll hear from both Erin and Michelle in greater detail around the status of federal public lands. I wanted to mention with respect to boat ramps that some remained open during the closure. Many across different jurisdictions have started reopening. Hunting and fishing seasons for Oregonians are ongoing, though currently there are restrictions for non-residents. And certain counties in particular have already begun reopening campgrounds and are seeing really high levels of interest in that opportunity. We heard great reports from how the ski areas opening by reservation went this last weekend as well. So if you want to go to what's closed, that'll help me finish with this, where are we now? And then I'll go to where are we going. So many Oregon state parks have started reopening, and we'll get to see a cool heat map on in the next slide in just a second. But many of our state parks remain closed. Many others have limited services. So the types of amenities that you're used to might not be the same as a traditional experience. Many developed recreation sites are still closed at this point, but are making strides to reopen, and some are opening, like I said, on a daily basis. Certain areas where it's hard to maintain that 6 feet of physical distancing are likely to stay closed for a while. So for example, picnic shelters. And then we've heard loud and clear from community leaders along this sort of mid and north coast and in the Columbia River Gorge that while, for example, some of those areas might be in phase 1, they're not yet ready for visitation from out of the area. And so the agencies are doing what they can to support that local desire and time sort of openings in concert with one another and in accordance with local readiness. So if you want to flip to the next slide, I just wanted to show this heat map, for example. It's easy to find, or perhaps you could put it in the chat feature, just the Oregon State Park status map. This is updated daily at this point, and green means open, yellow means open with reduced services, red means still closed. As a reminder, Oregon State Parks are not yet open for camping. There's been a decision made through June 8th to cancel existing reservations, but plans are being made about how to reopen campgrounds. So that's kind of where we are now. Where are we going? Well, like I said before, we're seeing increasing outdoor recreation access across the state on an almost daily basis. That will continue to be done in accordance with the governor's direction and that from the Oregon Health Authority. It also is going to be based on agency capacity and their own operations plans. So just like many businesses or other organizations, agency budgets have been hit as well, and managers need to be able to operate in accordance with health authority guidelines to keep both visitors and staff safe. That takes time to plan, it takes resources to execute. So based on ongoing guidance from the governor is sort of point one, agency capacity and their own operations plan is point two, and to say it again, where local communities are ready. And that local readiness piece is really important. So while we've been developing statewide guidance, a lot of the conversations now and in the next couple of weeks will be down at the local level between county commissions and field offices and the like. So I wanted to mention here that the level of access, the ability to actually get outdoors may rebound, and in fact, in some ways is rebounding faster than the level of service. So what do I mean by that? Amenities that we're used to, like the presence of field staff, or site features like picnic shelters or bathrooms may not be opened or have the same level of service as we're used to and historically. And we all have a role to play in educating and sort of being prepared on that front. So what's next? What's coming? Well, we'll continue to work collaboratively to do our best to provide outdoor recreation opportunities that we know are vital to the physical and mental health and well-being of Oregonians, as well as a key driver of our economy, as Kristen cited. We'll continue to try and synthesize and simplify the guidance that's out there. So for example, by developing a responsible recreation messaging toolkit called Take Care Out There, which has been a partnership between Travel Oregon, the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, and the Office of Outdoor Recreation, we'll continue to share a consistent set of messages around how to plan ahead and how to take care while you're out there. That toolkit's available for all to use and is being updated. The tiles that were the last couple of slides are examples from that toolkit. We'll also continue synthesizing and simplifying information for folks where there are questions, so that whose operations might sort of fall between the formal executive order or health authority guidance. And I know there's many folks on the phone who are working on that through small business development centers, through regional destination marketing organizations, Travel Oregon. It's a big part of how I've also been spending my time with the Office of Outdoor Recreation. For example, pulling together a set of frequently asked questions for outfitters and guides, trying to get feedback on those FAQs from outfitters and guides themselves, as well as the agencies that manage permits. And while that's not public yet, we're sort of through a couple rounds of drafting and expect to release those FAQs by the end of the week to, again, try and simplify the information that's out there. Where are we going on group size and travel? I know that's probably a lot of what's on people's minds. Group size for social and recreational gatherings for counties in phase 1 allow for local gatherings of up to 25 people where physical distancing of 6 feet or greater can be accomplished. Additional changes to group size and travel guidance, where, again, thinking back to that previous slide, the call to action or the ask is that folks continue to recreate locally. Those things will be part of phase 2 and phase 3, as I understand it, and have not been developed at this point. So what I'd like to end with just very briefly is how is it going? Well, perhaps unsurprisingly, we have both anecdotal and data-driven accounts of outdoor recreation use at high or historic levels. Over this past Mother's Day weekend, for example, hunting and fishing license sales are rebounding. Waterway access permits offered by the Marine Board for non-motorized boats are up. Google mobility trend data shows that while all other places of business and work recently are down, parks use is up. The list goes on. People want to get outdoors, they're hungry for it, and that's no surprise given that the majority of Oregonians make outdoor recreation a huge part of their life, and many make it part of their livelihood as well. So how else is it going? Well, just to be frank, I mentioned it a little bit before, many agencies are dealing with constrained budgets and having to make cuts in services offered, delaying seasonal hires, or have seen reduced revenues based on closures in the recent past, as well as a reduction in lottery funds that supports, for example, the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department. How do we move forward? Well, we are encouraging outdoor recreation. I want to make that clear. It's vital to people's mental, physical, and emotional health. We're working to support businesses so that they can operate, both retail and outfitters and guides are able to operate now, so that we can help jumpstart the economy. And the ask that I would sort of close on here is, to whatever extent anyone seeing this webinar has an audience, to use your voice to communicate responsible recreation messages. The better that we're able to get out good information about expectations and about how to recreate responsibly right now, the better it will go. And hopefully without continued increases in recreational access to and through the summer, so that as we all reflect back, a year or two from now, we can be proud of the way that the outdoor recreation community was part of the solution for helping get Oregon back on track. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Kristen and be available for questions at the end.
Great, thanks. So this is Michelle Mitchell, and Kristen, I think I'm up next here to present. So I'll just jump straight in. Give me the thumbs up if that works for you. All right. So I want to specifically start by thanking the state of Oregon. Travel Oregon and the Oregon Office of Outdoor Recreation have been incredible partners through this really challenging time. And I think that as we look back on these events, there'll be a lot of things that we might say, gosh, we could have done that better. But the one thing I'm confident of is we will be proud of how we've shown up together as partners. And I really appreciate the work of the state. I also want to acknowledge that we're coming up on Memorial Day weekend. And there's some important things about Memorial Day weekend, of course. One is that it is our time to thank service members. And I know many of you on the webinar here today likely fall into that category. And so thank you for your service. Also Memorial Day weekend, near and dear to all of our hearts here on the webinar today, is the start of our summer recreation season. And so it's a big time for us. I'll say that all of the U.S. Forest Service forests here in the Pacific Northwest region are moving towards a less restricted recreation access status. And we're all aiming for opening by Memorial Day. I'll also share that Kaylin's totally right. Open doesn't mean fully open. Many of our forests and sites are going to continue to have closed restrooms. They're going to have limited access, potentially no access to potable water, etc. And so we're really relying very heavily on the group here on the call today, as well as our public affairs officers and others, to help message the idea to the public that self-reliance as you visit these sites is really important. And so folks need to be ready for the types of amenities that they may typically expect at U.S. Forest Service sites to not be available to them as they visit here in this transition state that we find ourselves in. I mentioned that we're moving towards being open or in a less restricted recreation access state by Memorial Day. What that means specifically is that the closure order that has been in place for all of the Pacific Northwest forests, with the exception of the Columbia River Gorge, Mount Hood, and the Gifford-Pinchot, that regional closure order will be lifted this Friday, and that will open all developed recreation areas here in the region. The Columbia River Gorge is going to continue to work locally with their state and other public land management partners and communities to figure out how to open safely and sustainably. They're in the gorge. They're on a little bit of a slower time frame given the complexities of that site. The Gifford-Pinchot and the Mount Hood are moving towards lifting their individual closure orders, and in fact, the Gifford-Pinchot has already done so. And so almost all day use areas, including trailheads, will be open on U.S. Forest System lands here in the Pacific Northwest this coming weekend. There will be some sites, as Kaylin had mentioned, sites where social distancing is not feasible or where employee and public safety challenges still exist, such as the Columbia River Gorge, that will remain closed. So we encourage folks to contact their local forest to get the best and most up-to-date information. Again, we're really emphasizing strongly reliance on, or self-reliance as the public comes out. Another thing that we're going to be working towards emphasizing is shared stewardship. This idea that our partners and the community here on the call today are really important to us. We want to engage you in helping us to manage your public lands, and we hope that you will accept that invitation. And I'll just land on how we can use your help right now. This idea of responsible recreation and teaching people, helping people to understand how to recreate responsibly in this environment is a big lift for us, and we really need your help there. We also need your help reminding the public of the need to come prepared and to take care out there. And so, Erin, I believe you're up next to share some information on BLM, and then I think we're going to take some questions as well. And so to you, Erin.
Thank you, Michelle. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Erin Curtis. I'm the Section Chief for Social Sciences with the Bureau of Land Management in Portland. And I want to first thank you for your participation today, as well as Travel Oregon for bringing us together. I also really want to thank Kaylin and the state for their leadership throughout the challenges we've all been facing over the last few months, because, and I agree with Michelle, right, that it's just really great to see the partnerships developing and evolving, and the lemonade that we're making out of the situations that we've been facing. So, so the first thing that I'd like to share is we have 8 district BLM offices located throughout the state of Oregon. And while the BLM did close many of its developed recreation facilities a few months ago, BLM lands in general they've remained available for dispersed recreation. So whether that be hiking, camping, hunting, fishing, those types of things where developed facilities were not involved, public lands remained available for outdoor recreational use. But as we were going in terms of talking about reopening the developed facilities. And I want to thank Kaylin again for laying out, and Michelle, the criteria that we're looking at when we decide whether a particular site or facility does need to be reopened, and thoroughly reviewing what our staff capacity is out there on the ground, what local communities are telling us about their readiness to bring visitors in nearby. So, and it's definitely been a diversity throughout the state. So our districts are making those decisions, and that's been working out well, I think. But if it's not, we certainly want to hear about that. And so the main thing that I would just say is the BLM did begin reopening some of its developed facilities on Friday the 15th, in line with some of the phase 1 counties that were approved last week. So things have been going relatively well. We did issue, the BLM did issue a press release yesterday, and we also updated our recreation status website yesterday as well, to basically put out many of the key messages that Kaylin and Michelle already covered, for folks to be aware of when they're out there recreating in the outdoors during this day and age. So our hope is that our district offices will be issuing some local level press releases here shortly this week. We anticipate additional openings in advance of the holiday weekend, and we're hoping those district press releases that will be shared with their local media outlets will be hitting the street sooner than later. And our recreation status website will maintain the latest and greatest information about BLM site statuses. So those are the key points that I wanted to share. So thank you very much again for your time.
Hi, I can't tell if I am on or not. I just see Erin. Oh, you can see me, Erin? Thank you for nodding your head. Yeah, we're having a little bit of an issue with the spotlighting on Zoom today. So I apologize for those of you who could see me flossing my teeth. But I hope that all provided some entertainment for you in your Zoom days over there. So we're going to move into Q&A, which is great. We have about 20 minutes for answering questions. So I'm going to start with a few of the themes that came through in questions that were asked before we got started today, and then we'll move to a couple of the questions that you guys have shared with us during the presentation. So the first one is around camping. So camping seems like a great opportunity for people to be outdoors and socially distance at the same time. Opening up camping would also allow for public land managers to socially trace people as well. From your perspective, what are the key factors needed to open up reservable camping, and how can the tourism industry help? So let's start with the order that you guys went in. So let's start with Kaylin, and then Michelle, and then Erin, if you all have responses.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So Sam's video, what are the keys to implementing a reservable camping system, essentially? How do we get there?
Right.
Okay. What I've heard from the couple of the counties that have opened so far is that that's the approach that they've taken is by reservation only at this point, and that's both to handle demand as well as to manage the fact that not all individual campsites are open. I can't speak to what it would take for the federal agencies to go to a reservable only approach, but reservations, how far in advance for what sites are certainly part of the state parks camping operations plan, and more details about that will be released by the end of the week.
Okay, great, thanks. How about Michelle?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So, as I had mentioned, U.S. Forest Service day use sites are going to be opening towards the end of this week. The Columbia River Gorge will be opening later this month. They're currently working with partners. Campsites are remaining closed, and we are taking a local risk assessment based approach to thinking about how to open those sites. We're very interested in not only aligning with the states on that action and activity, but aligning with local communities so that we can make sure that we're being responsive to and thinking about their needs as we move towards opening. Some of the considerations for us are personal protective equipment still is constrained for us right now. Protocols to appropriately clean campsites are constrained, and some of the measures that we typically take as we move towards opening our sites seasonally, such as hazard tree assessments, have been limited or have not taken place yet this year. And so we're looking at how to address all of those constraints. Our intent is to do so in partnership and to do so as quickly as possible because we know folks are really anxious to get out there.
Yeah. All right, great. Thank you, Michelle. Erin?
Sure. The only thing I would add to that, the BLM is facing similar challenges as well. But, you know, the one thing that I would throw out there and what we've recognized is the decision to open these sites can't be a one size fits all or nothing approach, right? And really that's based on, again, getting back, we have 8 different district offices, and I like to say they have their own unique special sauce of what their recreation workforce looks like. And so that could be, you know, permanent government employees, it could be seasonal employees, it could be volunteers, it could be youth corps conservation crews, it could be contractors. And usually it's a combination of all of the above to operate or develop recreation sites over the course of a season or a year. And at the end of the day, each recreation workforce has its own limitations and challenges that they're facing in being able to safely or get a site up and running or operate it for the duration of the season. So our, you know, the challenges that we're facing with, you know, folks not being able to come into work or deciding that they don't want to take on a seasonal appointment, we have a reduced capacity that we're facing. So that's a key factor in whether we're determining to open a particular recreation site or not.
Okay, excellent. I have a couple of follow-up questions. One is for you, Michelle, I believe. Also could be Kaylin response as well, but a question around the gorge opening later in the month. Will the state and federal lands be opening in tandem? Or
Yeah, you know, our intent all along is to be as an alignment, much in alignment with the state and with local communities as we possibly can. And so I'm really proud of the work that the entire gorge community has been doing to share stewardship, to communicate, to stay in collaboration with one another. The one thing I will say is alignment doesn't mean that we're all going to look exactly the same, but our intent is to make sure that we are opening in cooperation and coordination to the fullest extent possible so that we don't inadvertently have an impact on one another as we move towards that stage. And Kaylin, looks like you may have had some thoughts to add to that.
Nodding in agreement. Yeah, I would echo what Michelle said. And the thing I find myself saying a lot right now is that people are, you know, hungry for outdoor experiences, but are really driven by, for the most part, the place and the experience first, and maybe only secondarily the land manager. And so we are very sensitive to the fact that it's easier to understand if there's similar opportunities across different jurisdictions, right? So that we're not causing a bunch of crowding in one area because another like opportunity that's nearby but managed by someone else isn't open. So totally agree with what Michelle said there, that is the intent, to work together and at the sort of direction of local community desire in terms of timelines.
Okay, I'm just going to group a couple more U.S. Forest Service questions together before kind of shifting the focus. One is the Mount Hood National Forest opening with the rest of the Pacific Northwest Forest on Friday? It was just a point of clarification.
Yeah, the Mount Hood is moving towards reopening with the rest of the national forests, and they've been working in alignment with the Gorge and the Gifford Pinchot National Forest together as a collective in that community. Again, the best way to get information about what is open and what is closed is going to be to contact your local forest. They will have, and your local public land manager in general, they will have the very latest on specifics. But come this Friday, with the exception of the Gorge, we're going to be more open than closed where day use is concerned.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. I'm sorry, okay, I might come back to it once I find it. Here's just a note I'll just share that was shared by Melissa Reinhardt, that she wanted everyone to know that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has almost all day use sites open as well. Oh, this is, sorry, specific to, Columbia River Gorge, Willamette Valley, and the Rogue River Basin. And she shared a link. So we'll share that out with the materials when we follow up from this webinar. So many of our tourism partners want to collaborate with public land managers to support the successful opening of public lands, and then communications to clarify what is open. Whoa, sorry. What is open? We effectively use these facilities. And then communicate basically and clarify what's open and how we can use these facilities. So what do you think are the top things that the tourism industry can do to partner with public lands, and how do we go about doing that? And let me know if you want a clarification, but anyone is willing to jump in.
Yeah, I have a brief sort of just affirmation of the ask that closed out my comments, which is to use your communications channels and to look to that Take Care Out There Responsible Recreation Messaging Toolkit, which we've committed to keeping updated and to serve as kind of a consistent set of messages that will be evolving as the guidance evolves. So look to that toolkit and use it, please, if it works for you.
Okay, any other suggestions from Erin and Michelle?
I would just throw in there, I'll plug the BLM website again, our recreation status website that has links to all of our district offices, information about what's open and what's closed, and as well as their contact info. But I would also say, if you are interested in engaging in terms of pitching in and helping out, I think a lot of us are figuring out what stewardship looks like as we go in this day and age. But I think having those conversations with our district offices at your, within your local communities, I think really that's the best thing or the most effective way to really support those local sites and programs where they need it the most right now. Because like I mentioned, they're all facing somewhat unique challenges.
And Kristen, I'll chime in on that. Before I do, I want to make a quick correction on the status of the Mount Hood National Forest. They, along with their partners, are working towards an opening transition later in this month, and so they're aiming for May 29th. So I want to make sure that clarification gets out to folks, and my apologies for the confusion there. With respect to shared stewardship and engagement in the management of your public lands, we have been working with a number of key nonprofit partners across Oregon, and because we cover Washington, that state as well, to really dig into those risk-based assessment work to identify how to do that safely, how to make sure that those who are engaged are not putting themselves at risk, and how to take advantage of that help, because we do really need it. That assessment work is going on with those statewide nonprofit partners as we speak. And I'm really hopeful that we'll be able to get some guidance out to the greater partner and volunteer community here really soon.
Excellent. Thank you guys for just kind of moving into that. There have been a couple of questions around volunteering and whether or not that was going to be possible with the reopening of public lands. And so I'm curious, Kaylin, if you have anything to add to that.
Sort of affirming the points that Erin and Michelle both made, which is that local contacts working sort of within your existing networks, if this is something you did previously, reach back out to those folks that you already know. If you know there's organizations that are interested in this work, plug in with them. And that the guidance might differ slightly based on, for example, staff capacity. You know, it takes staff to manage volunteers and accept sort of that free help. That's all, that work is being done right now. So the Forest Service mentioned, you know, guidelines being worked on this week. OPRD, State Parks is also working on that information. There's also a national sort of stewardship and volunteer guidance that's being developed in real time. So I'd say, you know, stick to it. And as we see group size or travel restrictions hopefully continue to loosen, that might really accelerate the opportunity to get some volunteer work done on the ground. And then just to circle back, it's sort of a quick Travel Oregon plug to the question of what can folks do. Sharing communications, the toolkit is great, but I've also been sharing personally, recommending other folks share out the What to Do in Oregon's Outdoors webpage frequently. That includes links to many of the agency-specific websites. So it's kind of like one page that then has, you know, Forest Service, BLM, Army Corps, State Parks, et cetera, all linked from there. So I'm sure that'll be in the resources you follow up with, but just wanted to say thank you for keeping that up to date. So it's a great resource.
Yeah, thank you, Kaylin, and absolutely, that'll be one of the top resources that we share in our follow-up information that comes out. So I'm going to kind of jump off of that point, Kaylin, around volunteering and so forth, and move into questions around how do you layer the guidance? And I know this is kind of complex, and so I actually want to start with a specific question, Kaylin, around events. And so this has come up a couple of times from our attendees. You know, which guidance are they following, and what guidance specifically around events do we have right now? Specifically, the question was around bicycle rides in September.
Yep. It's like there's a peek into my schedule this week. So that's another one of those ongoing conversations. For folks that are directly engaged in outdoor recreation, whether that's as a sort of management entity or from the business side, the outdoor recreation guidance from the Oregon Health Authority is the first place that you should look and continue to look. It's already been updated once since May 8th to reflect some changes in last week's executive order. And then you'll also want to be paying attention to the group size limits. So for example, I mentioned that counties in phase 1 allow gatherings of up to 25 people as long as physical distancing might be maintained. Now, the question of permits is kind of separate from that, but as I understand it, the permitting entities, and there's quite a few for something like a bike race or that would differ, are also going to continue looking at that guidance. So just as a first step, I would say if you operate on a consistent permit, reach out to your local permit administrator and just start that dialogue, and we'll all continue to collaborate and make sense of kind of the guidance. That's the synthesizing and sort of simplifying stuff that I'm trying to work on right now. So
That's great.
is it going to be possible? I'd say that it's very likely that could be true, but it's also an unknown at this point. It really depends on the particulars.
Okay, so a couple more around kind of the statewide guidance. So one more that's a little more general, and then the next one's going to be kind of moving into the guide and outfitter questions. So one is around, I'm just going to read it because it's a little hard to distill it. I'm curious about your thoughts or your understanding of the policies around rural counties recreating outside of the 50-mile request. In some rural places, 50 miles from home is still in the middle of nowhere. Is it okay for folks to visit other areas that are within open counties, but might be 90 miles from where they reside? It's a very specific example, but I think you probably get the gist of the question. So
yeah, absolutely. So there's no rule, right, around 50 miles. The guidance is to minimize non-essential travel, period. And there's also a recognition built into that that's different for different people based on their needs, and different for different communities based on the available resources, whether that's a grocery store or a certain outdoor recreation opportunity. And so the frequently asked questions that State Parks has up on the website, makes direct reference to that, that's sort of a general way of simplifying and thinking, where what we're encouraging people to do is take a day trip, go enjoy the outdoors, bring everything you need, and then for now, return home. Maybe that's more than 50 miles in rural areas, and I certainly recognize that. I think other people do too.
okay, thank you, Kaylin. So, okay, moving on to the guides and outfitters. One of the questions was just whether or not we would be doing a webinar soon where we could sort of lay out the protocols for the guides and outfitters. And that's definitely been something in conversation at Travel Oregon. So I think that's something we can delve into deeper at a certain point. But I want to get to a specific question around the river permits and shuttling clients, and they're wondering if there's any guidance around shuttling clients specifically. And I think this would actually kind of filter back to Kaylin, because I think there are protocols from the state that would help give some guidelines on that.
In my communications with the governor's office this week, to that same question that came up last week, it would point folks to the transit guidance that is in effect statewide, and was released on Friday. So governor's webpage or Oregon Health Authority webpage, the same place that the outdoor recreation guidance lives, would be to look to the transit guidance in particular, which talks about physical distancing and face coverings in a public transit setting for the most part, but would be applicable in that question.
Okay, great. Okay. I think some of these we can clarify afterwards. This is a busy weekend for recreation. I'm concerned about vehicles going off-road. Will there be capacity for enforcement from public land managers to enforce motor vehicle use and non-motorized use? So that would be to Michelle and Erin, and Kaylin, to whatever degree you can speak to that for State Park.
This is Erin with the BLM, and I mean, we had very limited law enforcement capacity. We do rely on support from state and local law enforcement departments as well at the local level. So I'm not aware of any major reductions in law enforcement capacity going into this weekend.
And that's similar for the U.S. Forest Service. Our strong partnerships with local sheriff's offices remain in place, and our pre-COVID capacity with respect to law enforcement is pretty much where we are right now. We, again, really are hopeful that this broader community represented here can help us share the message of responsible recreation, as we really do believe that when the public knows what the right thing is, they do the right thing. And so we're really appreciative of any help folks can give on that front.
Okay, great. Here's a little bit more of a straightforward question. We just have, let's say, 1 more minute. This might relate back to the Travel Oregon page, but a question about, are you keeping your websites up to date daily with this information?
So I'll grab it.
Yeah, go ahead.
We've got a really smart team of public affairs specialists in the field and here in Portland throughout the region, working on trying to make sure that the public has access to the best, most up-to-date information possible. And those folks are really dedicated and passionate about that work, and they're doing a really great job. I will not promise to you guys that everything on our website will be up to date to the second, though, because things are sometimes changing by the second. And so what I'll say is we've got really good people doing their best.
Right.
I'd love to just offer that it's a great time to reinforce the idea of having a plan B, right? So that if you show up somewhere or send somewhere, it's on someone somewhere, maybe it's closed, maybe it's just crowded, and you realize you have to go somewhere else or change your plans a little bit to avoid crowds. Just sort of setting that habit of sort of expecting different levels of service and having a plan B is something we're trying to reinforce right now too.
Okay, excellent. Well, I want to acknowledge that there were about dozens of really important questions. So we will work to get responses to those and back to you all within a short amount of time. So we're going to go ahead and move on, and I just want to say thank you to our speakers. What you can find here on the slide are all of the links that you will receive as well after the webinar that contains essentially all of the information that you need to know. Each of the agency's websites where you can get more information. And it says an article about what reopening Oregon means for you. I think that might be, sorry, I think the language we really want is what to know about Oregon's outdoors right now. We will be sharing that in the follow-up information. I also want to call out here the COVID-19 toolkit on Travel Oregon's website. Hopefully all of you have found that. It highlights current resources at the federal, state, regional, and local levels, as well as information on communications, travel impacts, and research, and public health information. We'll link to this as well. And I also want to call out, if you're not on Travel Oregon's e-newsletter list, that also is accessible at the bottom of the industry website. So once again, thank you very much to our panelists for taking the time to share information with us. And lastly, thank you for that. We want to highlight an upcoming webinar that we're doing in partnership with the Oregon Restaurant and Lodging Association around best practices for reopening Oregon's lodging operations. So that's going to be on May 21st from 1 to 2 p.m. You can find the registration link both on our website as well as in the materials that we'll be sending tomorrow. So hopefully you can help us spread the word on that to the businesses who would be most interested in this information. So thank you all for your time today. Our agency is focusing on how we support the intentional reopening of Oregon's tourism economy, and we'll be supporting local communities throughout this economic rebuilding process, continuing to work with you, the greater industry, to create a strong, sustainable community. So thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.